Yeah, great stuff. Mark Sandman and the Trio. What a band. Morphine from Boston. They renamed Central Square in Cambridge Mark Sandman Square as he had a heart attack in Italy as they were going on basically their first worldwide tour. Great stuff. Cure for Pain, of course, one of the very well-known songs by Morphine. Other ones like Super Sex and so many others. Check out every Morphine record. I think you'll like everything they put out. Just amazing talent from those guys. All right, so we're going to go over to the news notes right now and give you some flavor, as Flavor Flav would say. Flavor most, put it on your toast. Here we are. Fauci criminal referral. Benny Johnson, as frustrating as Benny Johnson is, and I have a couple posts from Benny Johnson here. Rand Paul announces he is, because he's a big Trumper, and he won't criticize Trump on this stuff. Rand Paul announces he is referring Fauci directly to the DOJ for criminal prosecution. So let's hop on over and hear what Rand has to say. Again, if you're looking for the video on Rand Paul and his investment in Gilead, his wife's investment in Gilead, we have a separate video about that and the fact that he did not actually disclose it until after the window was supposed to have been closed on it. It actually was like $1,500. It was a fairly small investment, but people want to know about that stuff. Well, here is Rand Paul speaking with Benny Johnson.
So you are encouraging state AGs to potentially take up this issue. What does it look like from your committee right now? Because your committee will have now a contempt vote. Do you believe that that will pass out of committee and Republicans will be on board? And would that be able to go directly to the DOJ? Would this be similar to a Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro contempt vote where they both served prison time?
Yeah, I think they were held in contempt for not appearing or testifying. I think that's why Anthony Fauci showed up today, because there's pretty solid precedent that the courts sided against Bannon and against Roger Stone for not testifying. That's why his attorneys, he had high-priced attorneys. That's why he showed up today and pled the fifth. But whether or not what will happen with contempt, we will vote it out of committee. It will take every Republican voting for it because I don't know that there'll be any Democrat. There's a possibility we might get one Democrat vote. But my plan is, at this point, probably to send it directly to the Department of Justice. You could demand a floor vote, but I don't have a great deal of confidence that it would pass or be able to escape the filibuster numbers. You'd have to get 60 votes, and that would require 7 Democrats. I think that's unlikely.
Do you believe?
Okay. Inside Rumble already, I can see Wally Walrus is saying, and pretty astutely, nothing will happen to him. He will take public scrutiny and retire with hundreds of millions of dollars. Karen Carpenter is in the house, and she's saying, yep, exactly. And Wally says, clown show. All right, well, that's a pretty safe bet, I think. Let's continue on and see some of the landscape here. As CNN's Aaron Burnett asks NYU law professor if Fauci is in real trouble after pleading the fifth 111 times. His answer, it made things worse. This is very interesting. Now, you saw what Rand Paul had to say about the president, and Benny Johnson asked some pretty astute questions there. And yeah, it seems like Fauci showed up because of the precedent set under things like the Bannon case. But here's what the Vigilant Fox has to say. Yes, the answer from this NYU law professor, Mr. Goodman, was that it made things worse. So check this out. This is quite interesting stuff here. All right, so here we go.
112 times to invoke the Fifth Amendment. I mean, you can't even string all that together. That obviously, it sends a message. Will that strategy work? Because he says, well, I had to do that because, you know, they're looking for perjury traps. Or does that just make it worse? And is he in real trouble?
I think it makes it worse. It's even a curious way in which you wonder what his legal advice was, why they decided to do that. Yeah. Because he does not face criminal jeopardy for the pardon in all likelihood. He's pardoned for all actions before January 2025. But that also means that you're forced to testify. That's how prosecutors use immunity or pardons. And they say, now you're forced to testify because you don't have any criminal liability, what we're going to ask you about. So then to plead the fifth is actually, he could then be held in contempt. There could be theoretically at least, a Justice Department that goes after him for not answering when he is not really facing that criminal charge.
Yeah, and also when the reason put out is perjury traps, then of course, again, to the layperson, it's just saying, well, why wouldn't you just say the truth? What would be the problem in that? Yeah. So, I understand that's a layperson thing, but it doesn't sound good.
Yeah, and of course you can't say the truth, because if you said the truth, then that would run counter to what he was saying all along. So of course you can't say the truth. That's pretty significant. Now, I want to give you a couple other major items, one of which is the entire segment of Josh Hawley. And I'm no fan of Josh Hawley, but this is something that I think deserves to be shown. And Hawley touches on some of the legalities, but he also, I think, very well exposes Anthony Fauci's Fifth Amendment statements for being as absurd as they are. So let me show you a little bit more here in the news notes that we have to offer. And there's quite a smorgasbord for those people who are the paid subscribers. And I'll cover pretty much all of these, but I do want to mention this. I said Fauci's fault, perhaps, but he should not be alone. There's another criminal. Here is another criminal whose lockdowns breached half the Bill of Rights. Now we're going to the former mayor of New York City, Mr. French Fry Man. That's right. Oh, yes, indeed. Mayor Bill de Blasio says Republicans shouldn't be talking about COVID because Americans want to put it behind them. Yeah, I'm sure. Don't you? You just want to put it all behind you. That's got to be it, right?
Fauci was one of the people who helped this country get through it. I worked with him very closely when I was mayor of New York City, because New York City was originally the epicenter in this country. And Fauci was, thank God, someone who actually knew something and was consistent in the advice he gave, and was someone you could have a real conversation.
The advice he gave was wrong. The advice he gave actually had nothing to do with helping people achieve a natural endemic state. It relied on false advertising from Pfizer, which literally took their safety group and then gave them the drug. Everything that this guy de Blasio did was a breach of the U.S. Constitution, especially the lockdowns, which breached the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments. It's just absurd. And the First Amendment, because he tried to shut people down who were trying to protest outside. That's interesting. Now, I should make this distinction, of course, for those people. The contemporary view of the First Amendment is that the First Amendment applies to the states. It actually breaks the state of New York's constitutional protection of freedom of speech. The First Amendment actually only applies to Congress. So I should make that distinction. It's important to bring that up and not drop the ball on that. But the guy's just insufferable. I mean, it's just incredible. It's just, there are more people dead because they took the advice of Fauci and Mayor de Blasio than those who did not. Because the mortality rate, the survivability rate of this, even with the inflated numbers and the way that the government gave $30,000 per so-called COVID death, although you could never know it, as Deborah Birx admitted on April 20th, 2020 in the White House, when she said, well, we're lucky because if someone comes up positive with a PCR test and they die, then we can count them as dying from COVID, which is completely unscientific. And then they would shovel money to those people to subsidize those medical centers. So what does that do? That incentivizes the medical centers to ramp up the number of people they're claiming died from COVID. Of course it does. So there's never, ever going to be a way anybody can say how many people died from COVID. And then yesterday, of course, we went back to the chart that showed suddenly flu disappeared for that entire year. Where did it go? I don't know. Must have gone out with the French fries of Mike de Blasio, right? Or Bill de Blasio. That's what it was. Now, just a couple quick ones to keep in mind here. A little side-by-side comparison that maybe Bill de Blasio would want to remember. Fauci diaries, private versus public. 5 biggest contradictions. Private diary entry. 1, Wuhan lab leak theory, April 3rd, 2020. I no longer believe that the market was the origin of the outbreak. It now appears that a lab leak is a likely scenario. Now, remember, everybody, this was not really a diary. This was something that he knew was going to be put out for public consumption. Okay, so you got to be very careful here. As he starts to admit things, he probably already knew these things, and then he has to put these out after he tried to give himself cover. Public statement, May 11th. So April 3rd to May 11th. There is no credible evidence to suggest that COVID-19 originated from a lab in Wuhan. Okay, literally a month later, he's still saying that there's no evidence. Number two, masks. Masks are not really effective in preventing infection of the public. We knew that in 2020. I was writing about it for MRC TV and getting attacked by NewsGuard for actually citing the fact that that very quote had been exposed from his own internal emails to people out there in the public. But we couldn't put it in the public, even though it was already confirmed. On April 3rd, that's 2 months later, everyone should be wearing masks. Masks are an important tool in our public health arsenal. Right. And of course, he claimed that he only said that they weren't important because they were so important, he had to get people to think that they weren't important so that they wouldn't use up the masks because they were so important. Hello, Humpty Dumpty. The COVID fatality rate. The case fatality rate, the CFR, more like 0.2 to 0.3% rather than 2%. That was in February of 2020. In March of 2020, you said the mortality rate was likely around 2%. Again, completely false. Everybody knew first that you couldn't know because we already knew by then that they were subsidizing people. And then Deborah Birx admitted it in April. We knew. Keeping children out of school is a mistake. The negative impact is enormous, he wrote in August of 2020. And then 9 days later, publicly, he said, there's no doubt that closing schools is the right thing to do. Was he Wilford Brimley eating Quaker oats? Then there's natural immunity is real and very difficult to ignore. Duh. All you had to do was go over to Great Barrington, Massachusetts. You could have met with Jay Bhattacharya and a few other people. That's, but on December 1st of that year, rather than September, he said, I do not think natural immunity is reliable. Natural immunity is the only thing that is reliable. And I got in a debate with somebody about that on Facebook because he said, you're saying that people shouldn't get the jabs. I was like, yeah, first, we don't know whether they're actually efficacious. So that's going to inspire people to get the things and then go out into the public thinking that they're somehow going to be protecting people by not spreading the virus when they don't know. You're making it riskier. How stupid can you be? I mean, it's the most basic fundamental stuff in science. I didn't get a degree in epidemiology, but it was pretty easy to figure that stuff out. So there's a little more. Here is one of the key moments from yesterday's Fauci fall in the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee meeting or gathering, the hearings. Despite Josh Hawley being utterly criminal himself when it comes to war and supporting the genocidal Israeli-U.S. killing machine, and despite Hawley not admitting that he himself continues to support taking your money to fund the unconstitutional CDC and NIH and NIAID, and many other obnoxious programs, he offered observers some witty and salient points during his exchange with Fauci yesterday. Here is both the wit and a valuable observation about the flimsiness of Fauci claiming his right as protected by the Fifth Amendment to not answer. So again, we'll touch on that legal side of things. This, again, coming from Benny, I love Donald Trump no matter what, Johnson, and Josh Hawley, of course, supporting genocide. But what he does here is valuable. So we'll separate it from the personality and the objectionable things of that man in other regards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, nothing says honesty like taking the fifth, huh, Doc? Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color tie are you wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color is the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyer is sitting behind you now, shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people. But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic, you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally, cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You remember Greg Folkers? Who was that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Your chief of staff is the answer. Do you remember Patricia Conrad? Who was that?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
She was your personal assistant. And what were these individuals doing in the depth of the pandemic in November of 2020, when millions of Americans were suffering from COVID? What were they doing? I tell you what they're doing. Folkers was on your behalf soliciting and gathering information for a cash award. Let's look at it. We've got his email right here, right over my shoulder. Folkers says, I'm working on this nomination for the Dan David Award for Fauci. We need to beef up the COVID part. Do you have language in the can that you could share that delineates how we responded in new ways to COVID? He sends this to multiple federal employees. What was the Dan David Award? Do you remember, Doc?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
It was a $900,000 cash award. $900,000 cash award. And he got it because he used federal employees to get it. And this wasn't the only award, was it, Dr. Fauci? In fact, you applied for and received at least 8 other federal cash prizes on federal time using federal employees and federal resources. Here they are over my shoulder. Besides the Dan David Award, you've got the Partnership for Public Service, you've got the Adelson Prize, you've got the Smithsonian Award, you've got the National Academy of Medicine's Award, you've got the CDC Foundation. In fact, you turned your staff into a full-time application machine. You actually wrote to people and said, do you think maybe I'd qualify? And you got cash for all of this. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 employees, was it? In fact, you used 8 separate federal employees on federal time using federal resources to solicit cash awards. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Here they are right over my shoulder. Here's all of them. The people that you use, federal employees, so that you could go and get cash money. And the most hilarious part is that you weren't content to even dragoon them into applying for all of these cash awards. You then had them go out to the ethics agencies and ethics watchdogs and demand that you be able to get the money. That's right. We've got it in your emails. Your staff and employees on federal time, using federal resources, being paid with federal dollars, are soliciting cash for you. And then they're turning around and saying to the agency, we don't want just an answer. We want to get to yes, because Fauci wants the money. He wants it. We want to get to yes, and yes takes time. This is your chief of staff again, using federal email to pressure the agency's own ethics people so that you could get money, so that you could get rich. And it violated the law, didn't it, Dr. Fauci? Didn't it? It violated the law, didn't it?
Is that a question?
It is a question. You can answer. Go ahead.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Federal law, as you very well know, prohibits the solicitation of cash awards or other personal benefits for federal employees. And it certainly prohibits using your own employees to do this. 5 CFR section 2635-205B. It says it right there in black and white. You cannot use federal resources, federal dollars, federal employees, federal offices, federal email, federal time to solicit cash awards. And you did all of it. And the worst part is thousands of people were dying while you were doing it. You were supposed to be the nation's doctor and you're playing one on TV, but this is what you were doing with your time. Isn't that true?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, I can see why. I can certainly see why. You know what I can't quite figure out is that why you were so obsessed with it, because you're already rich. I mean, and your scheme worked here. I mean, your net worth now is north of $12 million. You got over $1 million in cash awards during COVID, during a 12-month, 24-month span during COVID. $1 million you knocked down in cash money using federal resources. Now you're worth more than $12 million. You've got a pension that in its first year paid out north of $400,000 a year. 1 million people dead, you're getting rich. 1 million people dead, you're using federal employees to get cash awards for you. 1 million people dead, and you're here taking the fifth because you don't want to admit that what really happened in all that time was a multi-month, multi-year course of self-dealing. Isn't that true, Dr. Fauci?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Yeah, well, silence is admission. And here's the real thing. At the end of the day, it wasn't just about the money, really, was it? It was really about a power trip. I mean, through all of this, you want to be the most famous scientist in the world. You were so focused on getting every award and every drop of cash that you could, all because you wanted to be on TV. You wanted to be the sun god of science. You wanted to be the guy who was in charge of it all. You wanted to lambast Trump. You wanted to make sure that nobody else stole your spotlight. You wanted to be the guy. You had time to sit for InStyle magazine. Here's what you were doing with your time. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you can't answer questions for the American people. You could sit for InStyle magazine, but you're here taking the fifth. You could sit for InStyle magazine and get $1 million in cash awards, but now the cat's got your tongue. I bet he does. I tell you what, here's my conclusion from all of this. This was really all about you the whole time. Somewhere along the way, you lost your way. You may have been a good public servant at one time. I don't know. But I can tell you from reading your emails now, from looking at what you did, how you used your employees, somewhere along the line, it became all about you. You became a narcissist and a megalomaniac and a liar. And you've lied to the American people, and you've lied to this body. And you've disgraced your profession by doing it. You called yourself the most famous scientist in the world. You've done more to harm science than anybody in my lifetime. And I hope you'll go home and write that in your diary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Three things that could be said about Josh Hawley that were missing in his presentation. First, Josh Hawley's criticism of Anthony Fauci not being honest, not being straight, applies to Josh Hawley and his oath to the Constitution and deeper ethics when it comes to immigration and when it comes to payoffs from Israeli-related interests and the genocide machine there. There's just as much shame that could be leveled against Josh Hawley for both of those things. And then you might have noticed the dynamic that seems to be at play. And I noticed this a lot when I was doing my journalism internship in Washington, D.C. in 1989, that party politics obviously is a massive dynamo. That when members of a particular party can get together and they feel like they've got something really juicy, they will be on fire and they will unite and push hard. And they did. They did this because they seized the opportunity The opportunity was given to them by Anthony Fauci. And what got overlooked was something I want to discuss. And I hope I'm not overlooking anything myself. So let's get into some more of this stuff, everybody. Let's go right over here. Meanwhile, here is Trump praising Fauci prior to handing him an official tax-funded commendation. Remember this from ye olden days. Let's talk about Donald Trump. We've got to bring the volume up on this.
Where is Dr. Fauci right now? Why is he not at this briefing, Will?
Here we go. Yep. I was just with him for a long time, President Trump says, when asked about Dr. Anthony Fauci's absence at today's briefing. Back in the good old days when, Donald Trump had set everything off with an unconstitutional declaration of a medical emergency. I don't know where that is in the U.S. Constitution, but he said it. And very clearly, he had been advised to say that, whether he knew that that would trigger the model state health emergency plans that were put into various state legislators and passed in the around 2003 to 2006 period. Well, I don't know. But one thing's for sure, he never responded to various governors and mayors cracking down on people's civil liberties. Police arresting people for no reason whatsoever, invading homes, shooting pellets at people's porches in places like the Midwest, shutting down businesses like gyms in New Jersey and Massachusetts, restaurants, and things like that. He never did anything about that. In fact, he incentivized all of that to happen. Not only that, he unconstitutionally pushed the CARES Act, along with people like Josh Hawley, to make sure that a bunch of money went out to giant corporations and never got repaid. But here he is, of course, talking about Anthony Fauci, and this is just before Anthony Fauci got a commendation.
Attend future ones.
I was just with him for a long time, and he's at the task force meeting right now. We have a task force meeting. He was there.
Does he agree with you about the need to reopen the economy soon?
Well, he doesn't not agree. I mean, we had a long talk, and he understands there's a tremendous cost to our country, both in terms of lives and in terms of economics, and in terms of many, many years of rebuilding something that was a fine-tuned machine. It was nobody's fault. It just happened. This horrible virus came from wherever, and it just happened.
You think Donald Trump was so stupid he didn't know where it came from? And by the way, yes, they were developing something there for people who are skeptical. As we know, I've been writing about it. I wrote about it over and over and over and over again. Even before it was widely publicly known, we were writing about the EcoHealth Alliance over at MRC TV. And yes, NewsGuard was going after me. Donald Trump must have known about that, don't you think? Maybe somebody told him?
Just happened. He fully understands that. No, he's a good man. I like Dr. Fauci a lot, just so you understand. No, he's not here because we really weren't discussing what he's best at. But
now, what's the next dimension of this? If Trump is a chaos agent, then did they use a leak of something that wasn't massively deadly, and then they took flu cases and claimed that they were caused by this so-called deadly virus, where they were doing work in Wuhan, and they were paying people through the EcoHealth Alliance to do the work after they moved it away, after Barack Obama said, you can't do it here, do it over there. So we know the way that they moved the chess pieces. The reasons why, I don't know. But we know how they moved them. Now, let's go over here and see a couple others. Just in case Jeff Cooner's watching, Jeff, you might want to talk about Donald Trump's culpability here and the fact that not only virus-wise was he culpable, but economically and structurally under his constitutional oath, the CARES Act was a massive middle finger to everybody except his friends. But it was definitely a middle finger to the patriotic Americans out there who somehow thought Donald Trump might be somehow connected to American patriotism, which is laughable. Here's another one, a good reminder that didn't offer enough disclosure of basic facts. This comes from Died Suddenly. This is getting out a few facts, however. Never forget the American who looked Fauci in the eye. Remember this moment? It was a good one. It didn't get out all the facts, but it was a good one that showed somebody actually had some common sense.
The people in America are not settled with the information that's been given to us right now. So I'm not going to be lining up taking a shot on a vaccination for something that wasn't clear in the first place. And then you all create a shot in miraculous time. It takes years to create vaccination.
Well, it used to take years.
Okay, it used to.
You know how many years were invested in this approach? About 20 years of science to get us to be able to do it.
20 years is not enough.
That would be 20 years of failure after failure after failure. But he didn't mention that, did he? No. And you didn't need the shot. The shot was dangerous. It never showed efficacious results, and you didn't need it.
And 9 months is definitely not enough for nobody to be taking no vaccination that you all came up with.
The only reason I'm talking to you right now, as close as we are, is that I've been vaccinated.
Right.
But if it allows thousands of people like you don't get vaccinated, you're going to let this virus continue to percolate in this country and in this world.
Something like the common flu then, right?
And that's not
It's
like
much
the common
more
flu.
serious than the flu.
Well, the flu kills a lot of people annually too.
You know how many people died of the flu the last year? I mean, not this year, virtually none, but the previous year, about 20 to 30,000. You know how many people have died from COVID-19 in the United States? 600,000 Americans.
So utterly preposterous. So that's where, again, the man had some good information, in the midst of it all, got some of the information out. You've probably been in similar situations where after the fact you said, oh, I wish I had said this or I wish I had said that. But it was great to see that on camera. And the fact that they're calling it a vaccination is just insulting to everybody. It's insulting to the definition of the word vaccination. And another valuable reminder, despite it coming from a far too easy on Trump source, again, Benny Johnson, Dr. Fauci said he would happily testify and cooperate fully with any congressional committee. This was back in 2022.
Well, if I become a punching bag, I'm a punching bag, but I am very happy to testify before any congressional oversight committee. I have nothing to hide. I can explain and validate everything that I've done. So, it's going to be inconvenient if they actually are out there essentially.
There you go. So that's, that Fifth Amendment quote, that's clearly a very, very keen explanation. That's a very important explanation. Can you explain that for us? Yes, please refer to the Fifth Amendment. That'll explain everything. No, it's not explaining everything. You're not being forthright with us in any way whatsoever. Yes, that's right. And let's go with Libs of TikTok. Haven't quoted this person for a long time because she's been insufferable on Israel. But let's go with this. Fauci's pardon is dated back from 2014. Do you know what else happened in 2014? The NIH awarded a grant to study bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Makes you wonder. Yes, that's right. And then what of the diary and how it was obtained? Now, this is Glenn Beck, and I haven't quoted him in ages either because he's been frustrating, and he's talking with RFK Jr., who also is massively frustrating, but there is value in what they have to say because it was not a leaked diary. This is, I think, a very important point to bring up here. I'm just waiting for the computer to respond. Maybe there's a lot of demand for Glenn Beck and RFK Jr. So here it is. We'll just go with this right away from Glenn Beck and RFK.
You found these diaries, and everybody is saying these are private diaries. Could you please lay
By the way, I just want to mention, do they have to do a dolly shot around Glenn Beck in everything he's on? I know the volume's a little low in this, but I do want to play part of it. You found these diaries, and everybody is saying these are private diaries. Could you please lay this to rest? These are not private. They were, I don't know why he put them on, but they were put on government servers.
Yeah, well, every American knows this who has a job. If you go into your office and the company that you work for gives you a laptop and you do work on that laptop, it belongs to the company. And that is true. That is federal law. If you do something on a government server, it belongs to the government. So he was keeping a diary for the book that he intended to write about his life. And at the end of his term, just before he was leaving, he emailed the entire diary to himself. So for years and years of keeping this daily journal, he emailed it to himself so that he could write his book.
So there you go. That's how it happened. And again, that's why when he was keeping these notes for his own autobiography, there's going to be a little bit of puffery and manipulation of some of that stuff there, because people might come to him and say, let's see your notes on this. And the editor might want to talk to him. So I thought that was also valuable. And numerous states are moving with charges against Fauci, but the list should be much bigger. Here's Nicholas Hulscher. He's noting this. And he's been very, very good. All sorts of wonderful stuff here. He is with Garland Nixon here. And you'll see Florida's Attorney General has now launched a separate investigation into Fauci. Fauci's fake pardon cannot shield him from state-level prosecution.
Deborah Bergs, Peter Hotez. These criminal referral requests accuse them of crimes such as terrorism, murder, homicide, fraud, abuse, and racketeering for lethal hospital protocols. They've already collected hundreds of victims in these requests to prosecute them. And so there are 2 active criminal investigations as a result of this. And then also lastly, Florida's Attorney General did just say they're opening an investigation against Fauci. And so I think that will be the avenue. He has to be prosecuted at the state level.
So there you go. Garland was filling in for Jimmy Dore. Great stuff. And Jimmy, of course, having been damaged by the jab, Jimmy has been just terrific on this subject. Garland Nixon been awesome on the warfare state and the genocide machine of Israel. I also want to show Peter McCullough. I haven't shown him very often in quite a long time. But here's Peter McCullough, President Biden's preemptive pardon of Fauci, beginning of pardon period, precisely coincides with NIH review of Ralph Barrick and Peter Daszak's proposal for NIH grant Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus Emergence by John Leakey. And of course, who got put on the committee to check to see whether the COVID-19 so-called viral epidemic came from a lab leak in Wuhan, but the very people who had been running the experiments in Wuhan. That would be Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance folks. And then Rand Paul. What Anthony Fauci said in public was the complete opposite of what he wrote in his diary. Not only did he lie to the American people, but those lies led to his decisions that cost people their livelihoods, and in some cases, their lives. Okay, and we have a few memories. People were forced off public benches at gunpoint. Small business owners trying to open gyms outdoors were arrested. Suicides and overdoses skyrocketed amid isolation. Children's development was stunted. And though Mario Nafo's wording is a bit off the mark here, the video compilation here is a fine memory jogger of some of the people who told us just how wonderful these jabs were. Don't forget the gene therapy shots, so important.
During 2021, we should be able to manufacture a lot of vaccines, and that vaccine, key goal is to stop the transmission, to get the immunity levels up so that you get almost no infection going on whatsoever. Everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal.
We can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Now we know that the vaccines work well enough.
So again, actually, what she said, what Rochelle Walensky said, was the exact opposite. What you were getting was asymptomatic spread from people, and yes, shedding from the injections.
That the virus stops with every vaccinated person.
No, it doesn't. So you get the drift. We know very well. It's astounding to think that anybody bought into that stuff. And again, the fact that you probably had tax money used to silence you on things like Facebook or Twitter or something like that, the way I was getting hit too. and some of my colleagues at MRC TV were getting hit. The same way that Israel would like to hit us now for trying to talk about things like the U.S. Constitution, things like the genocide, things like the fact that the Israeli state should not be there, and it should be the Palestinian state if they're going to have a state. And of course, then there's the whole Fauci heart thing. He has a heart. The story appears to be confirmed. Rand Paul goes ballistic on Dr. Fauci for hiding his blood clot vaccine injury while forcing vaccines on young people who develop the same fatal injuries. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But before we go to 7 o'clock, I want to show you something. This is one of my favorite channels on YouTube. This is that doctor who lives in Saskatchewan, originally from Europe. You can see Dr. Mikolaj Rajek. He is with Merogenomics. Now, Merogenomics often is sponsored by a vagus nerve stimulation company and a few other companies that are out there that support their promotion of their research, and he's very open about it. But he is really one of the absolute best scientists when it comes to biochem and cellular biology, immunology, and the results of the COVID jabs and ways to try to help people who have long COVID and jabs, CFE, and other types of things. He is looking at a new study, and he always goes out and does these walks where he discusses these studies, discusses maybe messages that he's been asked, questions he's been asked about things. I want to show you right now the early information about the spike protein and why it could. They're not sure, but it does seem to parallel, as I said, in addition to on-hand oncologists reporting high correlations between the jab and turbo cancer, we have this interesting preliminary info. And yes, we know that the research of gain of function was done in many labs, including the biolabs set up in the former Iron Curtain nations by Dick Lugar and so on and so forth. We'll get to that in a minute.
Spike protein possibly could be oncogenic itself, meaning it could be promoting cancers by the fact that it could be damaging to the genetic information in general as well, and it could potentially be promoting environment that is in favor to cancer. So let's break that down as well as to what specifically were they referring to. So number one I'll mention is that what is spike protein known to interact with? And of course, we all know primarily that spike protein interacts with ACE2 receptor because this is how it helps SARS-CoV-2 virus enter our cells, right? But since the COVID pandemic, we learned that spike protein can interact with many other additional proteins. I covered that in one of my past videos before as well. And here are additional ones that I'll mention. Apparently, according to this review, and I haven't studied this before, so this is all also new information for me as well. And apparently another possibility is that spike protein can interact with that protein NRP1 I mentioned earlier, the one that is involved in angiogenesis. By the way, that protein I mentioned is involved in forming new three-dimensional paths for cells. That can also be done for when neuronal cell axons, these tentacles of neuronal cells, NRP is involved in their three-dimensional spread as well in our brain.
So this is key. I just want to bring this up for those people who are looking at things like chronic fatigue for the long COVID symptoms and so on. We know that there's been damage to the vagus nerve, both from the people who got the injections and for people who got the long COVID. That problem with neuron connections and neuron growth and neuron destability or instability seems to be something that they're investigating as well here.
That's another good example. So supposedly spike protein can interact with that protein. So what are the biological consequences of that? Does it help to promote that angiogenesis events? We don't know. We just need to start investigating this. Apparently spike protein can also interact with those integrins molecules as well that I mentioned that help that are involved in helping cancer cells spread as well. It also interacts with toll-like receptors. Those are the molecules that respond to foreign elements in our body and what triggers inflammation. I did a video on that topic a while back as well, when that was first discovered as well. So the take-home message here is that potentially spike protein could be possibly oncogenic in itself. Now, this is all theoretical. We don't really know the exact details of this because these interactions are observed on, say, cellular level or in a petri dish in a lab. But what happens biologically inside human body is another story, right? So please keep that in mind. But we now have these clues that might suggest that there are other events happening besides what we thought originally, which was just spike protein helps the virus enter the cells, and that's it. Now,
so of course, we can keep in mind what Ralph Barrick has discovered, and the I'll say the very strong correlation between oncogenesis and the presence of the spike protein. But really good stuff. You can find that inside the news notes over at my Substack. And he's just saying, look, this is preliminary. It's interesting, and he's just fascinated by this, as many of us know that this sort of thing is something that many people have had to deal with. And later in the video, he does mention that for people who already had some sort of a cancer that had gone late, and it does seem to trigger a sudden resurgence of this, hence the turbo cancers for many people. So really troubling. And maybe I know of a couple people who just shortly after, within months of getting the shot, they were dead from massively, quickly growing cancers.